September 10th, 2024. This is the Arlington County Board of Equalization hearings. There are 6 board members present, making a quorum, and 6 cases on the agenda. The first case, RPC 170102A at 1650 Wilson Boulevard. There was a settlement signed on that, so that will be removed from today's agenda. The second case is RPC 28004066. Property is located at 1075 South Jefferson Street. Mr. Warren, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to the board, as well as the county. Good morning. I'll start on our summary of facts page, which can be found on page 43 of 91. This is the Wildwood Towers Apartments. It's located at 1075 South Jefferson. It's consistent of 2 tax parcel IDs. Part of this property, the parking lot splits into Fairfax County, actually. But you'll see that we're not contesting the value deduction, as it's the same assessment that's being deducted from the overall assessment in the current assessment. The initial 2024 assessment for this location was $34,572,400. The county is recommending a revision to $32,267,400. This property is a high-rise apartment complex located in South Arlington. The building it's an older building. It's originally constructed in 1965, renovated in 2003, and is 10 stories high. It's in close proximity to the Bailey's Crossroads in South Arlington. It's 134 total units and is a mix of 1 and 2 bedroom units. If I could, I'll focus the board's attention now to the county's apartment INE summary sheet, which can be found, I believe, on page 3 of their response memo. And you'll see that this page includes the last 4 reporting years of operations at the subject property, as well as the county's initial and test columns in our pro forma. This is a stabilized property, as you can see, indicated over the last 4 consecutive years from the gross potential income and effective gross income and total NOI. So it's in terms of expenses, it's been a fairly stable property. The county's test column, and I'm going to refer now to the gross potential income in the county's test column. You'll see did decrease from 3.5 million to 3.45 million upon review of the 2023 financials. However, their gross potential income of 3,454,600 is still significantly higher, almost $91,000 higher than what was actually reported in the year-end or calendar year 2023 income statement. You can look at the rent roll as well that we've included in our appeal package. That's found on page 82 of 91. And if you were to annualize that, that's a 1/1/2024 rent roll, you would get to a GPI calculation of 3,227,220, which is more in line with the actual operations in calendar year 2023, and still significantly lower than the county's gross potential income estimate that's used in their test column. Again, that gross potential income, that test column of $3.45 million is significantly higher than anything that's been reported in any of the last 4 consecutive years. And you can find that in columns A to C and E. Again, we've discussed this in prior years' cases. This property is extremely stabilized. There's low vacancy, and historically, what we've seen, I believe, the county do is overestimate their gross potential income in order to apply their standard 6% market vacancy rate that's applied to all high-rise apartments in the county. Now they're to then calculate their effective gross income. The other issue that we would like to discuss is with regard to the operating expenses. Again, this has been a fairly stable asset over the last 4 consecutive years. Over the last 3 years, operating expenses have been 38% in 2021, 39% in 2022, and roughly 44% most recently in calendar year 2023. The county's initial assessment for this property used an operating expense ratio of 39%. They did revise that upwards to 41.75% in their revised test column. However, it's still $46,000 below what the actual operating costs were most recently in calendar year 2023. So again, looking at the county's revision, it does bring the gross potential income down and the expenses up, but it's still with regard to the gross potential income substantially higher than, again, anything that's been reported most recently in the last 4 years, higher than what you can calculate from what's indicated on the 1/1/2024 rent roll, and operating expenses are still $41,000 above what this property was able to operate at most recently in 2023. With that, I'll cede the rest of my time. I think Sophie and Greg are on. I don't know if there's anything they'd like to add specifically about this location.
Sorry, Blake, I jumped in late. I think that was a pretty good synopsis. I don't know if Sophie has anything.
No, everything is well said. We just want to tell the board and reiterate that this property is located in South Arlington, and the market and the achievable revenue for these units are different compared to a few properties that were presented in front of the board earlier this year. So certainly keep that in mind. Especially the county has given a GPI that is higher than anything that we've ever achieved. And in addition, that this property was built in 1965. With the increase in expenses, operation expenses, it is just becoming more costly to maintain this building. Thank you.
And with that, we'll conclude our presentation. Happy to take any questions that the board may have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chicas for the county, please.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning, board members. Good morning, Blake. So again, fairly well surmised by Mr. Warren. We are talking about the property that's, again, extremely well stabilized. Looking at true vacancy, they've been as close to fully occupied as possible. In fact, the last 2 years, the rent roll has shown that they started the year at 100% occupied, both in 2023 and in 2024. There's a lot of talk about focusing on GPI, but again, as Mr. Warren surmised correctly, the reason why our gross potential is a little bit higher than what is actually being achieved is because, of course, we use a stabilized 6% vacancy and concession rate. If you were to look at that, while the gross potential is more than has been achieved at the property, the vacancy and concession is well more than has been achieved at the property. In fact, it's more than the last 3 years combined. Because we use a 6% stabilized vacancy, we do, of course, have to project a little bit higher gross potential to get to a realistic effective gross. And in fact, if you look at revision column F, you'll see that our projection is 1.2% increase year over year. That's after increases of 4.5% in 2022 and 2.6% in 2023. So less than half of what was achieved last year and a quarter of what was achieved in 2022. So again, very much in line with what's going on performance-wise at the property. Regards to operating expenses, again, well surmised, but we did note that the operating expenses jumped almost 14%, in fact, over 14% in year 2023. After years 2020, 2021, and 2022 were fairly well stabilized. You can see that our projection for operating expenses actually over 120,000 more than was achieved in 2022, and some 220,000 more than was achieved in 2021. So we do believe some of those numbers may come down in regards to double-digit growth and janitorial, maintenance, repair, admin expenses, insurance and tax, and total operating expense. In regards to total value, in fact, if you look year over year, you'll see that our revision actually calls for a negative 3% decrease from last year's assessment. That's in keeping with the increase in operating expense and the slight decrease in NOI year over year. But that's much more in telling of what's going on at the property as opposed to the appellant's request of a negative 24% drop year over year. Just much too aggressive. If you look at the column that supports their opinion of value, they actually call for a decrease in effective gross of 4%. That's just not in keeping with what's gone on at the property, with increases in 2021, 2022, and 2023. Not only was there a negative drop in value by their account, the operating expenses was stayed exactly the same, which called for a negative 11% decrease in NOI. Based on the history of the property, based on our very modest 1.2% projection for effective gross, and again, a modest 4.8% of increase for NOI, we do believe that the county should be confirmed at a revised value of $32,267,400. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions from board members? Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, I've got one for Chris. Chris, I think that if you take the assumption of reserves at 0.2%, I just did the math and I got about 70,000 for reserves, and yet they made a deduction of 80,000. And I guess my question is, wouldn't it be easier and make more sense if you allowed apartments a deduction for reserves and then kept the cap rate kind of more pure? Is that something that you think might be a better way to do it, or do you think it's not a better way to do it?
To be honest, Mr. Barnes, haven't put too much thought into it. This is something that's been in place now, I think, in my 16 years in the department. This was derived by 2 directors ago under Tommy Rice. Came up with the idea of increasing the cap rate, which of course has the effect of lowering the value. So there was the idea that by incorporating that into the cap rate, it actually helps to show that that value is generally more than the appellant is requesting. In this case, it is not. You are correct.
Yeah, they're requesting about 10 grand more than the county.
That's correct.
Given them. I only ask this because of the way Ditmar does. I mean, Ditmar is so efficient at what they do that I just thought for them it might make more sense to break it apart. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Matzkin.
Thank you. I have a quick question for the department. Chris, did I hear you say that the anticipated rent was a little bit aggressive because the property's history of vacancy is so low that the aggressiveness of income was designed a bit to offset the standard 6% vacancy, which is, again, much higher than their history? Did I hear that correctly?
That's correct, sir. Yeah, because we use a 6% stabilized vacancy, we have to account for that by way of what the history shows. Then the income stream over the last 3 years, total vacancy and concession equates to about 173,000. We're at 207,000 by using a stabilized number. Therefore, if we're to use quote unquote rents indicated by the rent roll, our effective gross would be much, much lower than what's been achieved the last 4 years.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, Mr. Chikas, if you take a minute to wrap up.
Yes, ma'am. So again, playing on that note, do keep in mind that while the talk has been on gross potential income, looking at the effective gross, again, our 207,000 that is applied as a standardized guideline vacancy is much more than the last 3 years combined. In fact, it's within striking distance of the last 4 years combined. Even that being said, it's a very modest 1.3% projection after a year of 2.6% growth, and 2 years ago, 4.5% growth. Again, the most telling thing is year over year, our revision calls for a negative 3% drop in value from last year's value, which again is indicative of the increase in operating expenses, even with the increase in effective gross. We do believe our revision of $32,267,400 should be confirmed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Warren, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yes. So just real quick, going back to the GPI issue, it becomes a little bit of an equalization issue in our mind because for a property that has very little vacancy, such as this, as of the valuation date, you're artificially inflating the gross potential income again to something that's never been achieved in any of the past 4 years, just so that you can apply the 6% vacancy that's applied to all apartments. If this property had the exact same vacancy as of the valuation date, 6%, they would not change their or increase their gross potential income. They would use what was indicated and not use probably something higher that's ever been achieved at the property. They would look at the 1/1/2024 rent roll and use the gross potential income that's achievable at that location. So and then you're not getting treated the same as a property that has a 6% vacancy issue, and you're calculating the actual gross potential income and not something that's higher. Again, with regards to the expenses, property or operating expenses have been increasing. Ditmar is very efficient at keeping costs down and as low as possible. But again, with this current market that we're in, inflation, supplies, labor costs have increased, and contracting costs have increased significantly, and that's expected to continue into the future.
Okay, thank you both. Okay, it's just among the board members. Where's everybody on this? Mr. Matzkin?
Thanks. I want to parrot the closing remarks of the appellant. We have, the department has for all the years I've been doing this, had, based on input, standard deductions for this and that and the other various elements of an income statement to include vacancy. They come up with a 6%. I trust it. It's based on some history and numbers that they have seen. And to say, well, here's a property that's doing better than our standard applied to everyone, so we'll just bump up their, as a deduction, vacancy, we'll just bump up their income, that I'm not aware that that's done. I mean, all right, this property's gotten lucky. Next year, they may have big vacancy and they'll be unlucky. There are certainly other appellants we've seen already this year who are unlucky more than 6%, but they get 6%, unless it's something extremely egregious, of course, that the department will be flexible. So I think the standard is the standard. The guideline is the guideline. When it comes to operating expenses, there may be some credibility in the appellant's position that our expenses are going up, but I'd like to see a trend of that first before, and not just take in anticipation. So other than the proposed increase, I agree with the test column. Lastly, because of my disaffection for bumping up the proposed income due to low vacancy, I ran numbers at a 3 and not a 6+% revenue income, and I could share that if you wish, what the bottom line is and all the constituent parts.
Okay, other folks?
Yeah, I did. I mean,
Mr.
sorry.
Mr. Hoffman.
Yeah, I did roughly the same thing I think that you described, Ken, but I just did it on NOI growth because I felt like the projection for, the issue going through the I&E, and it seems like every year this appellant fills out the I&E and certifies it, and then the county comes back and says that the NOI is higher, and then there's just always a disconnect in the two. So I mean, I looked through the I&E and it seems pretty straightforward. At $1,804,000 NOI last year, right? So if you take that at face value, they've got close to 5% NOI growth year over year, which is a little bit aggressive for a property like this. I think expenses have probably gone up as well. So even if rent growth was 5%, which is probably not for that building, NOI is not going to track to close to 5%. So I took the NOI and just took it up 2% year over year, and came up with a minor reduction. And I think, Ken, you did the same thing, but you did it on the gross up at the top, probably, right?
That's exactly right. I just, instead of a 6% plus bump up, I made it 3% and then read the numbers, vacancy, 6% of that resulting EGI and so forth.
And what was your final number, Mr.
My
Matzkin?
final number was Mine was $30,655,200. I changed nothing else, again, other than percentages of the EGI.
Okay, just to throw in there as a, I agree with everything that you're saying there. What I did, and I came up pretty close just to do, if you want to consider this as a test, I just took the appellant's actual numbers, which are in column E, capped it out and took the deduction, and it ends up at 30,774,964. So
Yeah,
I'm pretty close to what you did.
That's pretty close, and I'm a little higher than that because I put a little bit of an increase on NOI year over year.
Okay,
I mean,
Mr.
Panorama? Yes, good morning. I pretty much did the same, but I didn't go as far as the couple $1 million drop because I thought the income was a little bit aggressive, and normally I look at the rental rates. And the thing that I did is I went to the reconstructed numbers from Mr. Chicas, and I took $50 off each unit of the rent per month. So that brings the total income, it lowers it by $80,400. By keeping it a 6% vacancy, the same expenses, the NOI that I come up with is $1,847,543, and the final value would bring it to $31,495,000. That was my only thing that popped up. I think the income was a little bit aggressive on that.
Okay, Mr. Matskin.
Let me just add for the record, I've never seen where a property, let's say, was 12% vacant chronically, and the department decreased the reasonable expected income to offset a vacancy amount that wasn't, if you pardon the expression, sufficient. So I think we're all on the right track. It's just which of these disparate but similar approaches we ought to adopt.
Okay, Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, I noticed the same thing. I mean, the vacancy is so low through the years, and that's either because they're slightly under the market with rent, or their advertising is so good that they fill up. Like you could apply at another project and end up here because of the way that they advertise and set their rental system up. So I agree. I think that that this should be a slight lowering.
Okay, Mr. Mendez.
Yeah, I don't like the idea of just bumping up the income to offset the 6% vacancy. Obviously, it's not that high, but yeah, I would be inclined to take numbers and cap those out like you did. So I'd go for either Ken or Mary's number.
All right, Mr. Yates, I'm going to hold off because we had started before you had joined. Okay, so where is the bulk of the body here?
Well, the simplest, the most direct is yours, I think, Mary, your approach, because I made a decision it's 3%, which is aggressive, but relatively speaking, okay.
Yeah, either way, it's a good test of, and they're so close. I mean, 100,000.
I would support those.
All right, to Mr. Hoffman.
I can go with you, Mary.
Okay, Mr. Penaranda.
That'll be fine.
Okay, all right, then I am going to move to reduce the assessment to $30,745,000 even, and that is based on using the appellant's column, which I just lost the column E, and using the current cap rate and deduction.
All right, I'll second.
Okay, motion a second by Mr. Hoffman. All in favor? Aye, opposed. Okay, it is unanimous. The assessment's reduced to $30,745,000 even. Thank you. Okay, the next case on the agenda is RPC 0505203A at 2110 North Monroe Street. That case was asked to be withdrawn on Friday. I assume there's no objection from the county.
No, ma'am.
Okay, I will move to accept the withdrawal. Do I have a second? Mr. Hoffman. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Mark, are you on that? Okay. Just so that the record shows, Mr. Yates has joined us, and now there's 7 members. So that's 7-0, the withdrawal is accepted. Next case on the agenda is RPC 2300304A at 911 South Buchanan Street. Mr. Warren, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property.
Thank you. Again, I'll start on our summary of facts page, which can be found on page 97 of 151. This is the Columbia Park Apartments. It's located at 911 South Buchanan Street. It is consistent of 4 tax RPCs. It is currently assessed at $37,703,000. The county is recommending a value revision to $36,540,900. The property, it houses 178 units. It offers a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. It's located to the east of Bailey's Crossroad and Route 7, near Columbia Pike and South 4 Mile Drive in the Barcraft area submarket in South Arlington. Moving over to the county's page 3 and their apartment income and expense summary, you can see again the prior 4 years of operating history at the subject location, as well as the county's initial assessment in column D and test column in column F. This property is very similar in terms of what we discussed in the last property. It's a very stabilized property. It has reported very low vacancy over the last 4 consecutive years. And the county has done something similar, but it's a little bit more apparent with regard to the gross potential income here. Following, if you look at column D, you'll see that the gross potential income used by the county of $4,246,000, that was actually increased upon review of column E, the 2023 year-end financials, and increased to $4,281,500. As you can see, that's approximately $228,000 higher than the actual gross potential income that was reported in 2023 calendar year. The rent roll as well, if you look on, I believe the rent roll for this one is on page 142 of 151. And that's a rent roll that was included in our evidence package as of the valuation date 1/1/2024. If you were to annualize the rent in there of all the occupied units, you would calculate a total gross potential income of $4,007,820. Again, that's almost $280,000, $275,000 below what the county is estimated in terms of gross potential income for this location. With regard to operating expenses, again, the same scenario here. It's been a fairly stable asset, and however, as we spoke of with the last property, costs are increasing. Labor costs, contracting costs are increasing. Supplies has all been impacted. Utilities, electricity is up as well. And you can see that from the year-end 2022 column line items to now year-end 2023. Last year, in 2022, 2 years ago, the total operating expenses ratio reported was 42%. That increased slightly to 43.5% for the 2023 calendar year. The county was using an operating expense ratio of 40.5% initially in column D, and revised that upwards to 42.8%. But again, they're still, although it's more closely aligned with the actuals, still roughly $27,000 off of the actual operating expenses that were reported most recently in calendar year 2023. NOI, again, this is a stable property, and it's although it did see a dip in NOI from 2021 to 2022, it went from 2.3 million to 2.245. It did increase very slightly in 2023, most recently to 2,267,522. The county's revised NOI in their test column is approximately $35,000 above what this property was actually able to attain most recently in the calendar year 2023. So again, very same issues with regard to the last property. The county has made adjustments, but not quite enough, we feel, for operating expenses based on the stabilized operations there and increased costs that the property has been experiencing. And then as well as what we feel is an overestimated gross potential income because of the historical low vacancy at this location. And again, with that, I'll cede any remainder of my time to Sophie or Greg if they have anything else to add specifically on this location.
We don't have anything else to add, but we just want to reiterate what Blake said. This case is very similar to the last. All we ask is that the board provide equalization and giving us what everyone else is getting, the 6% vacancy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chikas for the county, please.
Yes, ma'am. So just to reiterate, this is in fact how we value all properties as long as I've been in the department. To go over the fact that there is a suggestion that if the vacancy is higher than guideline, we don't squash rents, when in fact that's exactly what we do. Because we're using stabilized vacancy and concession, our NOI comes off of the effective gross. So while it's beneficial for the appellants to point out the potential gross, because we're using more vacancy and concessions, in this case, that has been achieved over the last 4 years combined, we must use a more aggressive rent because we're getting to an effective gross that's in line with the history. If we look at the columns here, you'll see rent growth, effective rent growth, increase of 1.4% in 2021, 1% in 2022, and 4% in 2023. Our revision calls for 0.2% increase year over year. That's extremely in line with what's going on at the property. $8,000 increase year over year. That's looking at effective gross. If we're looking at the NOI, again, you can see growth of 7% in 2021, a slight dip, as Mr. Warren pointed out, and again, an increase to 1%. Our revision NOI is less than what was achieved in 2021, is within $60,000 of what was achieved in 2022, and within $30,000 of what was achieved last year. Very modest increases from year over year at a very stabilized property. 99% occupied as of 1/1/2024, 99% occupied as of 1/1/23. Again, please keep in mind that when we're using a stabilized vacancy, you must adjust for rents to equivalent what would be achievable at the effective gross level. Please count on columns A, B, and C. Line 25 is the effective gross year over year over year. You'll see growth 4 years in a row. Look at NOI 4 years in a row. You'll see that our revision is extremely modest and much more in telling with what's going on at the property. Our year-over-year revision calls for a 1.7% increase from 2023 assessment. The appellant's asking for a negative 17% decrease. To Mr. Larson's point about reserves for replacement, that's why it's a little bit hard to get a stabilized number. When you look at the county's reserve for replacements, it's $73,000 or $411 a unit. The appellant's asking for $25,000 reserves for replacement, or $140 a unit in this case. So again, much lower, even though this property is much older. Given the fact that we're using stabilized vacancy and concession, that again is a higher number than has been achieved the last 4 years combined, given that our effective gross is 0.2% increase year over year after a year of 4% growth, we do believe that the revision that calls for a 1.7% increase year over year is more in tune with what's going on at the property. We'd ask that the board confirm the revised value of $36,540,900. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Questions from board members? Mr. Mendez.
Yeah, for the county, I had heard you mention in your argument that that it's a standard practice to increase the GPI if the vacancy is under what is actually, or over what is actually achieved. Is there some sort of formula or process to get to the number that you got to?
Yes, it's to see what is a reasonable, a fair market estimate of that effective gross based on the income stream. So again, that's why I ask you to look at columns A, B, and C, line 25, which is the effective gross for 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023. That's where you can see again that 0.2% is highly in line with what's going on at the property, especially again after a year of 4% growth, 1% growth, 1.4% growth.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? No? All right, Mr. Hoffman.
Yeah, this one's probably for Sophie. Just year over year, what on average, if you had a renewal, what was the renewal rate? Was there an increase or was it flat or was it lower?
That's a very good question, Mr. Huffman. So our standard practice, so it really depends on, on the unit, the time that they gave them their notice to vacate. But on average, our goal is to achieve 3%. But that is not always the case because every time we give out renewal, a lot of residents, we have a system where they write back to us to see if there can be adjustments with the renewal. So that is our target goal of 3%, but it's not always achieved.
Perfect. Okay.
Okay, Mr. Chicas, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Yes, ma'am. So pure rent alone increased by over 4% in 2023 while retaining a 99% occupancy. So we do believe, again, that our effective gross of 0.2% is highly in line with what's been achieved at the property. Overall 1.5% NOI increase, again, less than what was achieved in 2021 and within $40,000 what was achieved last year. A modest 1.7% increase over year. We do believe the county should be confirmed at $36,540,900. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Warren, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Thank you. Again, this is a very similar case to the last property we just discussed. Again, gross potential income is $228,000 higher than column E than what has ever been achieved at the property in the last 4 years. The annualized rent roll from the 1/1/2024 rent roll would indicate gross potential income no higher than $4,007,820. The operating expenses have shown a trended increase year over year in each of the last 3 consecutive years. 42% in 2022, 43.5% most recently in 2023. And again, costs are going up, especially to operate these older properties in South Arlington with regards to utilities, electricity increases, supply and labor costs, and overall contracting costs for repairs and maintenance. And we're hoping the board that's reflected in the final value for this assessment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Okay, it's just among the board. Where's everybody on this one? Mr. Penaranda.
Yeah, I'll start on this. On this particular case, I don't see it quite the same as the previous case. I think the income, like Mr. Chicas indicated, it's really pretty much in line, in my opinion. It's not like the previous case that the NOI that was showing was never achieved. It was just much higher. In this case, the NOI that is being used in the revision, it was achieved before and it's pretty much in line. So I'm okay with the revised assessment on this one.
Okay, Mr. Matskin.
Yeah, I written a note early on in this case that I thought Mary's approach from last case was applicable here because it's based on NOI. And so it turns out that I think Jose stole my thunder. So I agree with his words.
Yeah, I did the same thing. I just as a test did it the same method that we used on the last one. And it's a difference of, about 548,000. It's too close in the weeds for me. I don't have the angst on this case that I did on the other ones. So I'm okay with the test. Anybody else? Mr. Mendez?
Yeah, I would go with your test. That's what I did as well. But if it's splitting hairs, I would stick with the revision.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Would somebody like to make a motion?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and move that we reduce the assessment to 36,540,900 based on the revision.
Okay, I'll second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? I seem to have lost Mr. Lawson. Mr.
I guess
Lawson?
it's 6.
Okay, so that'll be 6-0. Because I think Mr. Lawson was dropped from the call. Okay, the county's revised number of 36,540,900 has been confirmed. Okay, the next case is RPC 3500303A at 1111 Army Navy Drive. I understand as of this morning that was asked to be withdrawn. I assume no objection from the county.
No, ma'am.
Okay, I will move to accept the withdrawal. Do I have a second? Mr. Hoffman. All in favor? Aye. Okay, it's 6-0. The withdrawal is accepted. And the final case on the agenda is RPC 14043-031 at 3900 Fairfax Drive. You can start with your 8 minutes, Mr. Warren, and tell us about this property, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Again, I'll start on our summary of facts page, which is page 52 of 145. So this, the portion, we're not contesting the total assessment for this property, which sits on one tax RPC. This is the Quincy Plaza Apartments. However, what we are contesting is the county's valuation for just the ground floor commercial assessment, which the county does split out and render on on its own individual income approach based on their 2024 general commercial guidelines. So as you'll see, the 2024 assessment value that we're indicating here is quite a bit less than the total combined assessment for the apartments, because we're not contesting that portion of the assessment. The general commercial portion of the assessment is currently assessed at $5,477,300. And what we're asking for from the board today is a value of $3,608,300. Now, if you turn on to the next page, on page 53 of 145, you'll see again that we are contesting the income approach to value that's being applied currently for that commercial retail portion of the assessment. In prior years, Ditmar had combined both the apartments and any properties that had general commercial or ground floor retail into one I&E survey when it was submitted. And as was previously stated in the last case, they generally submit all their annual I&E statements on an annual basis every year. However, after discussions with in prior years with the county and issues with how the ground floor commercial assessment was being assessed, we were notified that it would be easier to or generally a better accepted practice to split out those two components. So file any I&E surveys for the apartments separately than the general commercial. So
my name is Brenda.
We did do that this year. The package that is includes the general commercial portion and an I&E survey, certified I&E survey for just that portion of the assessment that's related to the ground floor retail. The current assessment, if you look now also on the county's mixed use income and expense summary tab, you'll see that their assessment for that ground floor commercial can be found on column D2. And their gross potential income of $481,300 is again significantly higher than the actual retail income that was reported on the I&E survey of $309,886. It's around $180,000, $171,000 difference. The county then deducted a vacancy of 5.65% to get to a total EGI of $454,000. They then deducted total operating expenses of $54,238, which is 11.5%, or rounded up to 12%, which again is below their indicated guidelines. Their guidelines, which we included on page 123 of 145, shows the 2024 general commercial guidelines, which the county categorizes this as a retail strip / commercial in parentheses 211. The income ranges for those types of properties are from $20 to $78 a square foot, vacancy collection of 7%, and expenses of 15%. Again, they are below their indicated guidelines that are applied to all properties that are classified as a retail strip commercial 211 space. So we would request that the county or that the board equalize the assessment for this portion of the assessment and apply the standard 15% that's applied to all these general commercial zoned spaces. That matches up, that 15%, with the actual operating expenses that were reported on the I&E, and would indicate then, again, our target value of, we're using the same 7.3% overall cap rate, which can be found at the bottom of that page 123 of 145 for the guidelines for the cap rate that should be applied for those general commercial spaces, which again indicates our final requested value of $3,608,300. The last portion of this is the county is actually quite a bit higher on their net leasable area for the retail space, 9,720 square feet. And that's quite a bit less than what the actual rent roll would indicate, which is 7,945 square feet. So again, there's almost a 2,000 square foot difference in what the county's estimating in terms of the net leasable and available square footage for the retail in comparison to what the rent roll would indicate, and which is included in our evidence package. So again, I think what the county is going to testify after having discussions with Chris is that they are not going to change the general commercial retail without reviewing the entirety of the property. The owner is in agreement with the apartments and the current valuation of that portion of the property. And because this is reported as a separate I&E survey for just the retail portion component, and the county values this on its own separate income approach, we don't see why the county cannot consider this this evidence in assessing just this portion of the assessment. The taxes for this portion of the assessment these are triple net. It's passed down through the retail tenants, and it's extremely important to have these in line with what they should be paying in terms of the in-place rents that are there and the actual reported operating expenses. So we hope that the board takes consideration into this matter and the retail portion of the assessment for this location. Greg, Sophie, I don't know if there's anything else that you would like to add regarding this.
We don't have anything else to add. Just like all the cases that were presented in board this morning, we're here seeking for equalization. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chikas for the county, please.
Yes, ma'am. We want to start there. It's a little bit disingenuous, the idea that they're seeking equity but not providing the 97% of the total value for review of assessment. They want the taxes correct for the retail component, but not necessarily for the residential component. We'd like the board to understand this is a bit analogous to a home inspection where the appraisers are invited to see the attic, but not the kitchen, bathrooms, finished basement, etc. In looking at our original assessment, it's actually 2% over what was achieved in the year 2022 alone. We requested, as you can see on page 27 of 145, the I&E, and were declined that right. Virginia code does in fact state that the income stream must be provided at the circuit court level, but unfortunately does not speak to the Board of Equalization or departmental review level. Based on the lack of transparency, to adjust 2% of the assessment in favor of, as opposed to the total assessment, doesn't seem warranted. The board has seen this before. The numbers are what they are. If we got the 2023 I&E for the apartments and they showed an increase, which we believe is can be inferred pretty readily by the fact of their unwillingness to provide it, there wouldn't be an adjustment made to the retail component because the apartment side would be so low as to affect the total value. We have, in fact, in previous years, worked through both sides of the component, but we do need to see the total assessment in order to have that achieved. Based on this lack of transparency, the request not being granted for the 2023 income stream, we do believe, again, that a modest increase for year over year from 2023's assessment to this year's 3.3%. Even the appellants are requesting a increase of 2.3% themselves without addressing 98% of the total assessment. That being said, we do believe that the county should be confirmed at a value of $201,500,200. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions from board members? I'll ask the question I assume most people are going to ask. Mr. Warren, do you know why the apartment I&E wasn't submitted?
Again, we did not have an issue with the current assessment for the apartments.
Right, I understand that, but I mean, historically, it is submitted, and I mean, not having an issue with it means that you support it, so your documents should support it. Seems like that would be an easy handoff.
Okay. Well, in this case, we only wanted to address the general commercial, and because those are reported separately, we felt it was very much in line with, you know, if the county can estimate market value, and it's based on separate guidelines as well, that the county should be able to review what was submitted for this portion of the assessment and render adjustments based off that.
Okay. All right. Other questions? Mr. Metzgen.
For the department, I have questions on, let me get my rows right, or the names. My question is for 3 items. Where did you get the numbers, because they're so percentage-wise different than what was reported in column E, and that's specifically the retail income, the pass-through income, and the total operating expenses. That's a lesser percentage difference, but still different than, again, what was reported so meticulously by the appellant. Was that too much? You want me to?
No, sir. Yeah, so generally speaking, again, we rely on previous history because we are coming up with our January 1 real property value before we receive the 2023 information. The 2023 information is used to either confirm or call for revision. In regards to the 2023 projection, we almost assuredly would be relying upon the information received in the previous year's assessment, appeal. In this case, the rent roll indicated a certain amount of pass-throughs, approximately 91,000. We used 92.5, so get a very small increase over what was achieved in the year 2022. For rents, again,
say that again, Chris, please. That last 92,000 versus 91. I don't see.
Yeah, that. The annual charges listed for from the 2022 rent roll was 91,135. So again, we grew that by less than $1,000 or so, $1,015. Same idea with the rents in place. We use those rents that are indicated. And in fact, that's where we got the 9,720 square feet was the rent roll that was supplied last year, which indicated a square footage of 9,720. So as far as making those projections, they are based upon previous documents that are turned in.
Does that include column E, operating year 2023? I mean, did you get that before column E? Did you get those data before you made your assessment in whenever February?
No, sir. Yeah, those would have been sent in to us sometime in April
after
of 2024. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, all right, thanks. Question asked now.
Just to clarify, Mr. Chicas, were the I&E for apartment in previous years provided?
They were, and in fact, as point of fact, they were provided together, not separately. The retail was
Right, and then you
indicated on
pulled it
the
out.
apartment I&E.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, any further questions? Mr. Matskin?
I'm sorry, I was gonna, this wouldn't be fair to the department if I saved it for us. So let me go back at you, Chris. As an example, in column C, which you had in hand, it's the only thing that you could, and the prior years that helped you make your column D2 proposals. Just as an example, for retail, row 5, 256,007, and for column D2, 388,8. That the 256 is a little bit lower than the prior 2 years, but not much. But you've bumped it up 40% for your appeal. I don't understand your.
The amount that was indicated on the I&E didn't match with the rent roll that was supplied for last year's appeal. So in other words, last year's appeal indicated $123,000 more because they were fully occupied with 9,720 square feet. And again, annualized charges of $91,135. So the difference of what was indicated on the I&E did not match with the rent roll that they also supplied to us at a fully occupied retail outfit. So in other words,
we're indicative of what you saw.
We'd be getting in the projections, but it could be that there was some abatements that were still in place from COVID, some rent deferrals, whatnot. But the rent roll that they supply that we had as part of last year's packet indicated again an increase over what they reported by some $126,000.
Okay, thanks. That's interesting.
Okay, Mr. Yates?
Blake, you indicated, if I heard it correctly and I wrote it down, there's about a 20% difference in the amount of square footage, net leasable square footage.
Correct. Yeah, look,
do you know what the change was from the prior year?
I think they used the same. Don't quote me on that. I can probably look it up in our prior memo that was supplied by the board, but their estimate for net leasable square footage is higher than what is available for lease there.
Yeah.
I'm looking at it now, Mr. Yates, and I can attest to as the number used for last year was 9,720 square feet based off of 5 tenants in place, fully occupied.
Okay, any final questions, Mr. Hoffman?
Yeah, Sophie's still on the call. Maybe she can answer this. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a material issue we got to get ironed out. Like if you go to 26 of the packet, there's 5 suites. It's 9,720 square feet. I see Wonder Kids Learning Center in there, which I think may or may not still be in there. But then if I go to 141 of the packet, there's another suite. The Wonder Kids goes away, and I've got Camille Facial Salon, and the total square footage rentable is 7,945. So that's like a huge difference. Like, what's the leasing situation right now, or as of January 1st? Who was in suite? Call it suite 7, I think. I'm going to go back to page 26. Yeah, suite 7 looks like it's gone away. So what's going on in suite 7? Is it vacant? Is that why it's not showing up?
You know what? I think this might, and I'll have to. I'm just looking at the rent roll.
I mean, I can walk down there, but it's going to take me about 15 minutes to get down there and check.
I might have to retract my previous statement. I think Wonder Kids still is in there, and it was for whatever reason not included. So the square footage appears to be accurate by the county. So if you can,
I can tell me, yeah, I can confirm that we still have Wonder Kids Learning Center on site.
Okay. So what happened? The United Bank got cut up. then you put Wonder Kids in 25, 50 square feet, and then you put that small salon in there at like 775 and demised it. Is that the game? What happened?
So what happened, and I don't know how this happened. I'm looking at because the rent rolls when we get them from Ditmar, they actually come in an Excel file, and I'm not sure why it's happening or showing up like this right now because I'm looking at the original. But this Camille facial salon is actually is for a different tenant. So the tenant name, and I apologize for this error, but that tenant name and the square footage is not accurate. It should have been replaced by the Wonder Kids and
Okay.
square footage, but the monthly rents and everything in there is what Wonder Kids was paying.
So if I took the 79.45,
because if you look at like the annual square foot rent, it says $173 for 775 square feet. It's actually it's inaccurate.
all right. So if I took the 775 for Camille out, and then I added the 2550 for Wonder Kids, I'm at 9720, which is what Chris has as the square footage.
That is correct. And so I apologize for that. Our rent roll is in fact wrong right there.
Okay. And then it looks like, I mean, what can you just tell me what the face rents on those leases are? I mean, this is public. Maybe you don't want to do that, but I've got a I&E that says the total rent collected is like below 300,000, and then I've got if I actually add up what I think the face rents are off this table, it should be a lot higher than that. So like, what you want to say average face rent, triple net for the space? Can you give me something to go on?
Well, average, the base rent is that monthly rent amount that's listed right there. So it's around $40, $45.
Okay. All right. So that would put triple net gross potential rent at $45, $437,400. That's triple net at $45 a square foot on average times 9,720 feet. Everything else is just expense recovery, right? So you're going to collect that in rent, and then whatever goes out the door for taxes and CAMs and everything comes back in through rent recovery to these tenants. Is that accurate?
Correct.
Okay, so if I take the 437,400 and I cap it out at 7.3, I get $5,991,780 as the retail value, which is higher than what the department's got.
Yeah.
What are we appealing?
Again, our analysis for the cap rate. So previously too, the way these were assessed is that the county, these jumped up significantly 2 years ago. And it's because we were always under the assumption that cap rate, that 7.3%, was unloaded, and they would only use the base cap rate or the base rent. And 2 years ago, they started adding in the pass-throughs and then indicating that the cap rate of 7.3% was loaded. So what we're basing our analysis off of is what was actually the actual income that was reported off the year-end 2023 commercial rent roll or commercial I&E survey.
Okay.
Okay, any final questions? Mr. Chicas, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Yes, ma'am. Again, we'd ask the board to agree with the county's position that without a transparent dialogue involving all of the internal statements, income streams, et cetera, to ask for a review of the 3% of a $201 million assessment just seems faulty. Again, we'll bring up the analogy of asking for a residential view of assessment and only allowing the appraiser to see the attic as opposed to the kitchen, the bathrooms, to the finished basement, etc. Again, even without this information, I would call it to the board to recognize the extremely modest increase in projection of NOI, 2% over 2022's year, let alone 2023, which we can again infer that it was we are on the low side. We call for a 3.3% increase year over year and ask the board to confirm the real property assessment of $201,500,200. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Warren, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yes. Again, we're basing our analysis on just the ground floor rent and the income that was reported on the year-end 2023 I&E survey for just the retail component. Again, I talked about very briefly the county in prior years. 2 years ago, this assessment was pegged at $3.9 million. There was no changes in the actual occupancy or leases. However, the county's methodology had appeared to change, and then they started taking the total rent reported and indicating that the 7.3% cap rate was fully loaded. Again, we would ask the board to adjust the retail component for this property based on the actual reporting of the income and expenses. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. All right, it's just among the board. And, you know, I'll just say, I have a problem with not having the apartment information. I mean, we've had it in previous years. My gut feeling on this is that, you know, possibly the retail might have been a little high, but the apartments were so low that, you know, we didn't want to stir that pot, you know, but Greg, after doing your little test, it ended up coming up fine. So I'm fine with the county. I think if you don't provide all the information, the analogy, you know, that Mr. Chikas used about, you know, looking at a residential and not being able to look at the updated kitchens and bathrooms is pretty close here in my mind. So where's everybody else?
Agreed.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, Mr. Matskin?
Just to be flying the ointment, I don't agree with the analogy at all. The retail is the retail, the apartment's the apartment. I absolutely agree with the department that it's very short-sighted or odd or inappropriate to not report the apartments. Ditmar knows better. They're experienced. They've been around a long time in this county. But it doesn't affect the retail. It is what it is. The numbers are what they are. And I thought the numbers were much too big, except for the department's explanation to me that the rent rolls don't seem to jibe with the I&Es that come in, one. And two, more importantly, kudos to Greg, his double-edged analysis. So I just wanted to go on the record that the apartments, they ought to do it, but it's a separate issue. Nonetheless, the final result I support in all ways.
Okay. Anything different? Mr. Hoffman?
I'll say I do agree with Ken because these tenants have to pay these taxes, and so the appellant's given them their fair share to look at their taxes individually, and they, you know, they're doing it. They don't necessarily want to open up the whole $200 million apartment building for review, just to be able to give the tenants their ability to appeal here. So, you know, a lot of times you have a separate condo or a separate RPC and you can hear it as two separate cases. It makes it a little cleaner. There's time and expense involved in doing that. And, you know, they're carrying the building under one ownership group. So, you know, ultimately we want to make sure that whatever that component that's spliced out for retail is not like crushing the tenants, because I've experienced that as well, where, you know, it just gets kind of blindly distributed and they end up paying it, you know. So, but, and then to my other point, you know, if we came in here and it was definitive showing $40 was the rent, you know, there's a slight reduction there. I got a kind of a 40 to 45 range, so I'm going to go with 45. Because I kind of got to dig through this thing and do my own sleuthing to figure out what's going on. So I'm okay with where the county's at 5,477,300.
I would just say, I mean, I agree with the logic of what you're saying, but I also think that this is a management decision not to open up the can of worms, because if the, you know, retail folks are paying a little bit more, well, then possibly the rest of it should be on the apartments and it would be absorbed there. So the money's coming from somewhere, going from somewhere. So anyway, all right. Well, with that said, then I'm going to move to confirm the county. Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Yates is a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, it's 6-0. Again, Mr. Lawson is not on the call. The county's confirmed at 201,500,200. Okay, that completes the agenda for today. The other business I would like to address is tomorrow's agenda. Wednesday, September 11th, there's 4 cases that have been asked to be withdrawn from Mr. Warren, and that will save him having to show up tomorrow. So I assume no objection from the county on the 4 cases?
No, ma'am.
Okay, so I am going to move to accept the withdrawal on RPC 200130027, 200130009, 200120002, and 320240002. Do I have a second on that? Mr. Hoffman. Okay, motion and a second by Mr. Hoffman on all 4. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, that is 6-0 that those 4 cases have all been withdrawn from the agenda tomorrow. Thank you. Does anybody have anything else?
What's left? So we have 2 cases tomorrow then, right?
2 cases, right? The
Okay.
first BOE case,
First 2, got it.
4165. Yep.
Okay.
Mr. Ross.
Th-
Okay.
Thank you all. Have a good day.
Thank you, Billy.
Thank you,
board
everyone.
members.
All right, thank you. So that means we will stand adjourned at 10:12 a.m. Reconvene tomorrow morning, Wednesday, September 11th at 9 a.m. in person for the board for the 2 cases. Thanks, everybody.